"I pity the man who marries her," the Duke said, and he said it loudly enough that the whole of the long drawing-room heard him. He had not meant the whole room to hear. That was the truth of it, and the truth would trouble him for a week to come. He had meant the remark for his aunt alone, murmured behind the rim of his glass in the crush of candlelight, a private verdict on the young woman by the pianoforte who had just, with 3 sentences and a lifted brow, reduced a red-faced baronet to silence over the price of corn. But the music had stopped at the very moment the words left him. The last chord died, the chatter dropped into one of those sudden hollows that fall upon crowded rooms as though by conspiracy, and his low sentence sailed out over 40 guests like a stone skipped across still water. Kelver, 9th Duke of Selholm, was not a man accustomed to regret. He was accustomed to being obeyed, feared a little, flattered a great deal, and left otherwise alone, which was the arrangement he preferred above all others. He stood now near the great marble chimney-piece of his drawing-room, a tall figure in severe black and white, his dark hair swept back from a hard, handsome brow, and he watched the consequence of his carelessness arrive. The young woman turned. She was not a beauty. He had time in the long, suspended moment to be certain of that, and to be certain also that it did not matter in the least. She was slight, plainly gowned in a sprigged muslin that had been turned and made over more than once, her brown hair dressed simply because there had been no maid and no jewels to dress it otherwise. But her eyes, when they found him across the width of the room, were the colour of good sherry held to firelight, and they were entirely, alarmingly awake. Most people, caught in the beam of a duke's displeasure, looked away. She looked directly at him and she smiled, and the smile was worse than any frown he had ever received. "Your Grace is too generous," she said. Her voice carried without seeming to try. "To pity a man for a misfortune he has not yet suffered, and shows no sign of courting, why, that is charity of a very rare and forward-looking kind." Somewhere a fan snapped shut. His aunt, the Dowager Lady Anne Croft, made a small strangled sound at his elbow that might have been horror and might have been delight. The Duke inclined his head a fraction. He was aware that the room had ceased even to pretend at other conversation. "I spoke of no man in particular, madam," he said, in the cool, level tone that had ended 100 arguments before they began. "No," she agreed pleasantly. "You spoke of me in particular. That is a different discourtesy, but I find I can bear it. I have been pitied by finer judges than a duke, sir, and survived them all." She tilted her head. "Though I confess I am curious. You have watched me for the better part of an hour. Do not trouble to deny it, your Grace. The whole room watched you watch me, and in all that time you have not spoken a word to me. Yet you have arrived at so thorough an understanding of my character that you can pronounce upon the fate of a poor gentleman rash enough to wed me. I had not known that dukes could read a lady's whole soul across a drawing-room. It is a talent I should like to have. It would save such a great deal of tedious conversation." The baronet, whom she had earlier silenced, now laughed, could not help it, and choked it hastily into his cravat. The Duke felt something he had not felt in a very long time, the particular heat of a man who has swung hard at what he took to be a slow-moving target and found only air where it had been. He was not used to it. He disliked. And underneath the dislike, buried and unwelcome and quite impossible to root out, was the first small treacherous flicker of interest. "You mistake me," he said. "I meant no insult to your soul, of which I know nothing. I meant only that a lady who unmans a guest over his opinion of corn prices before the second remove is unlikely to prove a comfortable wife." "Comfortable," she repeated, as though tasting the word and finding it faintly spoiled. "Yes, I dare say I should not. But then a great many things are comfortable, your Grace, an old slipper, a warm brick, a dog that has learned never to bark. I had not thought a man wished for a wife on quite those terms. If he does, I wish him joy of his slipper, and I am very glad it will not be me." She dropped him a curtsy so exactly correct, so faultlessly deep and perfectly timed, that it managed to be more insolent than any refusal. "I shall not keep you from your pity, sir. I can see it is a large charge and wants your full attention." And she turned back to the pianoforte, and to the elderly lady in purple bombazine seated beside it, and resumed her interrupted conversation as though a duke were a draught from an ill-fitted window, noted, endured, and not worth crossing the room to shut out. The Duke of Selholm stood by his own fire in his own house and discovered that he had, for the first time in some 15 years, absolutely no notion of what to do next. His aunt saved him from having to decide. Lady Anne Croft slipped her gloved hand through the crook of his rigid arm and steered him toward the far windows with the practiced ease of a woman who had been managing difficult men since before he was breeched. "Well," she said, when they had gained a little privacy. "That was magnificently done, Kelver. I have not enjoyed anything half so much since your uncle fell in the trout stream at his own garden party. Do you know, I believe that is the first time in living memory anyone has answered you back and lived to finish the sentence." "Who is she?" the Duke asked. He kept his voice indifferent. He was fairly sure he did not succeed. Miss Willona Inchbald, his aunt's eyes, bright and shrewd and far too knowing, rested on him with open enjoyment. "She is companion to old Mrs. Delacourt. You remember Augusta Delacourt? She was a great friend of your mother's, deaf as the fire Heroines now and twice as sharp. I invited Augusta chiefly to vex you, and she has brought her paid companion, which I did not foresee, and which I now consider the single most fortunate accident of the entire tedious week. A paid companion." He turned the phrase over. "It ought to have settled the matter. A gentlewoman without fortune, without connection, without so much as a lady's maid to her name, hired to fetch shawls and read aloud and bear the temper of a deaf old woman. Such a person was so far beneath the notice of the Duke of Selholm that his careless cruelty to her that evening was scarcely even a transgression. One did not insult such women, one simply did not see them at all. He had seen her. He had seen very little else all evening. Her father was a clergyman," Lady Anne Croft went on, watching him. "A scholar of some note, I understand Greek and old sermons, and a great many books and no money whatsoever, which is the usual way of scholars. He died and left her nothing but her wits and her Latin, poor girl, and the world has no use for either in a woman without a dowry. So she reads to Augusta Delacourt for her bread, and she says the most outrageous things imaginable in the most charming voice you ever heard, and every match-making mamma in 3 counties would sooner see her drowned than let her near a marriageable son." His aunt paused. "I like her enormously." "You would," said the Duke. "I would, and I do, and so, my dear, do you, though it will take you a fortnight and a great deal of ill temper to admit it." She patted his arm and released it before he could summon a suitable set-down. "Now go and be civil to Miss Cordelia Ashe, who has 8,000 a year and the conversation of a boiled turbot, and who is precisely the sort of comfortable wife you claim to want. I arranged this entire dreadful party to marry you off to her or someone like her, and I begin to think I have made a serious error." She swept away in a rustle of grey silk before he could tell her that she had made no error at all. That he had come to this week of enforced hospitality with every intention of choosing some suitable, silent, well-dowered young woman and having the tiresome business of the succession settled at last. And that a penniless companion with a wicked tongue and eyes like fire-lit sherry had nothing whatsoever to do with any of it. He did not tell her, because it would have been a lie, and because his aunt would have known it for a lie before the words were cold, and there was no misery on earth to compare with being laughed at by Ottoline and Croft. The Duke crossed the room. He was civil to Miss Cordelia Ashe. He was civil for a full 20 minutes, and Miss Ashe told him at charming length about her carriage horses and her needlework and her mother's chilblains, and he answered in the right places and heard not one word in 10. Because across the room a woman in a made-over gown was making Augusta Delacourt laugh, actually laugh, a sound like a rusty gate, that the deaf old terror had not been heard to produce in 15 years, and he could not stop watching her do it. She never once looked back at him. That was the thing he carried up the great staircase with him at last, past the shadowed portraits of 8 Dukes of Selholm, who had all married exactly as they ought and looked, every man of them, thoroughly bored for eternity. She never looked back. She had bested him before 40 witnesses, silenced him in his own drawing-room, curtsied him into the ground, and then dismissed him from her mind as completely as if he had been the weather. No one had ever dismissed the Duke of Selholm. He stood a long while at his bedchamber window, a branch of candles guttering unheeded at his shoulder, and looked out over the black expanse of the park, where the young moon laid silver on the lake. He was 36 years old. He was one of the richest men in England and one of the loneliest, though he would have had his tongue cut out before he confessed the second part, even to himself, even here. 15 years ago, a beautiful girl with a soft voice and softer eyes had looked up at him across a ballroom exactly as Cordelia Ashley had looked up at him tonight, and he had believed every warm word of her. And she had taken his devotion and his trust and his young man's whole unguarded heart and traded them, in the end, for a marquess with a larger fortune and a house nearer London. She had told him, laughing, on the last day, that she had never for one moment mistaken him for a man worth loving, only for a title worth having, and a poor one at that, once a better came along. He had learned the lesson thoroughly. He had built himself brick by patient brick into exactly the man the world now feared, cold, untouchable, a fortress with the drawbridge raised and the moat well stocked. Women looked at him and saw a duke. He let them. It was safer than being seen at all. And tonight a girl with no fortune and no future had looked at him and seen, not a duke. He was not at all sure what she had seen, but she had not been afraid of it, and she had not wanted anything from it, and she had turned her back on it as though it were nothing at all, and he found, standing at his cold window with the whole silent house asleep around him, that he wanted more than he had wanted anything in 15 guarded years to make her look at him again. "I pity the man who marries her," he said aloud to the dark glass, and heard how the words had changed their weight since he first spoke them, how they had turned in his mouth from a sneer into something perilously close to a wish. He did not sleep well. He told himself it was the wine. Below, in the narrow, cold room at the top of the servants' stair that a paid companion was given in a great house, Willona Inchbold was not thinking of the Duke of Selholm at all, or so she would have said if anyone had asked her, which no one did. She was brushing out her hair by a single candle and telling herself, firmly, that a woman in her position could not afford the luxury of temper, that she had likely lost Mrs. Delacourt her invitation and herself her situation, and that clever tongues had buttered no bread since the beginning of the world. She told herself all of this with great good sense, and then she remembered the exact expression on the Duke's dark face in the instant her words had struck home, the flicker of pure astonishment, quickly masked. The look of a man who has walked confidently into a room he has entered 1,000 times, and found the floor gone from beneath him, and she laughed out loud into the empty little room, one hand pressed to her mouth, and could not for the life of her be as sorry as she ought to have been. She would be sorry tomorrow, she promised herself. She would be humble and quiet and useful, and she would keep her wretched wit behind her teeth where it belonged, and the great cold Duke of Selholm would never have cause to notice her again for the whole endless week. It was, as it happened, a promise that neither of them would keep. The Duke of Selholm arose early, as was his habit, and went down to his library before the house had stirred, which was also his habit, and there he found Miss Willona Inchbold sitting in his own chair by the cold hearth with a book open on her knee, and this was not his habit at all. He stopped in the doorway. She had not heard him. She was reading with the total, unguarded absorption of a person who believes herself alone, one foot tucked under her, a shawl pulled about her shoulders against the morning chill, her lips moving very slightly over some passage that pleased her. The early light came grey and gentle through the tall east windows and lay along the line of her cheek, and for a moment the Duke simply stood and looked, and did not announce himself, and was ashamed of neither thing. Then a floorboard betrayed him, and she glanced up, and the private softness vanished from her face as though a door had shut. She rose at once, the book clasped to her breast, and dropped him a curtsy that was, this morning, merely correct. "Your Grace." "I beg your pardon. I did not think anyone would be down for hours yet. Mrs. Delacourt sleeps late and wakes cross, and I find I read better before the day has been spoilt by other people. I shall go." "You will not," said the Duke. She paused, wary. In the plain grey morning she looked younger than she had by candlelight, and more tired, and he saw suddenly and clearly the particular wariness of a woman who is never off duty, who must be pleasant and useful and invisible from waking to sleeping, and whose 1 hour of stolen freedom he had just walked into and ended. The knowledge did something uncomfortable to him. He was not accustomed to imagining his way into other people's mornings. He had spent 15 years making very sure that he need not. "Sit," he said more gently than he had intended, and then, because gentleness alarmed him, added in his ordinary cool tone. "You have found the one warm corner in a house of 200 rooms. It would be a poor sort of host who turned you out of it before you had finished your chapter." "What are you reading?" She looked at him for a long moment, plainly weighing whether this was a trap. Then she sat slowly and turned the spine of the book toward him. "Your Herodotus, sir, the Greek. I hope you will forgive the liberty. I saw it on the shelf, and I have not held a copy since my father died, and I am afraid I could not help myself. It was the nearest thing to a sin I have committed in some years, and I mean to enjoy it thoroughly before you have me turned out of doors." "You read Greek?" He said it flatly, not as a question. "My father taught me, sir. He had no son to waste it on, and he could not bear to see it go unused, so he wasted it on me instead." A small dry smile. "It has been of enormous practical value. Whenever I am cold, or hungry, or spoken to unkindly by my betters, I have only to recall the second person aorist, and all my troubles fall quite away." The Duke crossed to the shelf and took down, without appearing to think about it, a second volume, and drew a chair to the other side of the dead hearth, and sat. She watched him do it with frank astonishment, as though a marble statue had climbed down from its pedestal to warm its hands. "Then we will be cold together," he said, "and read. I find I have no appetite for the breakfast room this morning. My aunt has filled my house with young women who wish to tell me about their needlework, and I would rather be pitied by you, Miss Inchbald, than admired by any of them." "At least your pity is honestly meant." He had surprised her. He could see that he had, and he found he liked surprising her a great deal more than he had liked being surprised the night before. Something in the set of her shoulders eased a fraction. "I never said I pitied you, your grace," she said. "You said you pitied me. It is a distinction I mean to hold you to. I am poor, but I am not so poor as to go about pitying dukes. One must draw the line at some folly or one is undone. You corrected a baronet on corn prices before you had known him a quarter of an hour." "He was wrong about the corn prices," she said reasonably. "Should I have let him go on being wrong, and loudly, in front of 30 people, out of respect for his consequence? I did him a kindness. A man who is corrected in a drawing-room by a companion in a made-over gown will remember it, and check his figures next time, and be the better landlord for it. Whereas a man who is flattered by everyone learns nothing at all, and dies stupid, and is mourned by his tenants only for the funeral ale." She met his eye levelly. "I make you a present of the observation, sir, since you are a man whom everyone flatters." The Duke was silent for a moment. Then, to his own considerable astonishment, he laughed, a short, rusty, unpracticed sound, the sound of a hinge that has not been asked to move in a very long time. It seemed to surprise them both. Somewhere in the great cold library, dust turned in a shaft of light. "You are without exception," he said, "the most impertinent woman I have ever met." "Yes," Willona agreed, entirely unrepentant. "I have been told so by experts. It is my only accomplishment, and I have practiced it faithfully, since no one would pay to hear me play the harp, and my needlework is a disgrace to my sex." "A woman must be good at something, your grace, or she is nothing at all, and I decided long ago that I would rather be good at the truth than at the harp. It has cost me every advantageous connection I ever had a chance of forming. I do not recommend it. But I sleep quite soundly." They read. That was the strange and unaccountable thing, which the Duke would turn over in his mind for the rest of the day and much of the night to come. They simply read, on opposite sides of a cold hearth, in a silence that ought to have been awkward, and was instead the most restful hour he could remember passing in his adult life. Now and again she would make a small sound of pleasure over a turn of phrase, and he would look up, and once she read a line of the Greek aloud, softly, not for him but for herself, and the old words in her low, clear voice went through him like the first warmth after a long journey in the cold. He did not tell her that. He was not yet so far gone as that. But he marked it, and he was afraid of it, and he did not leave. They were discovered, of course. Nothing in a great house filled with guests stays secret past 10 o'clock, and it was Miss Cordelia Asher who found them, drifting into the library on her mother's arm in search of the Duke, and stopping short in the doorway at the sight of him, the cold, unattainable Duke of Selholm, the prize of the entire season, sitting at his ease over a book with a companion in a mended gown. The two of them wrapped in a silence as intimate as an embrace. "Oh," said Miss Ashe. It was, the Duke reflected, very nearly the most interesting thing he had ever heard her say. Willona was on her feet at once, the book closed, the shawl gathered. The companion's mask dropped back into place so smoothly that a stranger would have thought she had been standing to attention all along. "Your Grace was kind enough to help me find a volume of sermons for Mrs. Delacourt," she said, in the flat, pleasant tone of a servant accounting for her time, and she curtsied to Miss Ashe with exactly the correct degree of deference, and she was gone before the Duke could contradict her. Before he could say that they had not read one word of sermons, that he had not been kind, that he had not helped her find anything at all except, perhaps, the first true morning of his life. He stood, the Greek still open in his hand, and watched the door through which she had disappeared, and disliked Miss Cordelia with a suddenness and completeness that rather shocked him. "Herodotus," said a dry voice from the corner. His aunt had come in behind the ashes, unnoticed, and was surveying the abandoned chairs, the two drawn-up seats, the cold hearth with the plain sharp eye of a general reading a battlefield, the histories. In the original, "How very improving, Kelva. I have known you 36 years, and I never once saw you read Greek for pleasure before breakfast. Whatever can have come over you?" "I could not sleep," said the Duke, and set the book down, and left the room with as much dignity as a man may who knows himself to be entirely transparent to the one person in the world he cannot deceive. The day, having begun so strangely, refused to right itself. He went out with the gentleman to shoot, and shot badly, which never happened. He came in and was cornered by 3 mothers and their daughters over cold meat and hot ambition, and answered them all with a remoteness so glacial that even his aunt raised an eyebrow. He caught himself twice at a window, watching the lawn where the ladies walked, looking for one figure among them and telling himself he was not. He was the Duke of Selholm. He did not moon at windows over a companion with a sharp tongue and no dowry. It was beneath him. It was absurd. He was 36 years of age, and long past such things. He was still telling himself so when he came upon her in the walled garden at the failing end of the afternoon, on his way back from the stables, and his whole idiot heart lifted at the sight of her like a boy's. She was sitting on the stone bench beneath the espaliered piers with a mending basket in her lap, and Mrs. Delacourt's torn lace across her knee, working a needle by the last of the light. And she looked so weary and so alone and so entirely without the sparkle she wore for other people that he almost turned back and left her the small mercy of not being seen. But she looked up and caught him, and there was no retreating with grace after that. "Your Grace." She began to rise. "Sit," he said for the second time that day, and this time she sat without argument, which alarmed him more than any impertinence could have done. He came and stood over her, awkward suddenly, a large dark man with no notion of what he had come to say. "You left this morning," he said at last, "before I could tell you that you had lied to Miss Ashe. We read no sermons." "No," she agreed, not looking up from the lace. "We read Herodotus, and it was the pleasantest hour I have spent in a 12-month. And it was precisely the sort of hour a woman in my position cannot be seen to spend, and so I lied, and I would lie again, and I will thank you, sir, not to correct me in front of the future Duchess of Selholme." Now she did look up, and her sherry eyes were tired and steady, and for once, without any armour at all. "You are very kind, Your Grace, in your strange cold way, and I do not think you know how to be, which makes it stranger and rather kinder. But you must not be kind to me where people can see it. It costs you nothing. It could cost me everything I have, which is a situation and a character and not one thing more. Do you understand me?" The Duke of Selholm looked down at the tired, honest, unbeautiful, altogether extraordinary face turned up to his in the dying light, and understood. With a lurch that felt like the floor going out from under him for the second time in as many days, that he was in a very great deal of trouble indeed. "I understand you," he said quietly. "Good." She bent back to her mending. "Then go in to dinner, sir, and be dull and grand and unattainable, and marry Miss Ashe's 8,000 a year, and forget you ever caught a paid companion crying over Greek in your library. It is the sensible thing. You strike me as a sensible man, under all that consequence." "I am not," said the Duke, "nearly so sensible as I have led the world to believe." And he left her there in the garden before he could say anything worse or truer, and went into dinner, and was dull and grand and unattainable exactly as she had ordered, and did not taste one mouthful of it, and knew himself for the first time in 15 careful years to be lost. It rained on the third day, a steady grey northern rain that came down without hurry and without any apparent intention of stopping, and it drove the whole of the house party indoors upon one another's company, which was Lady Ancroft observed to no one in particular. Precisely the sort of weather in which matches were either made or murders committed, and sometimes both. The Duke of Selholm spent the morning discovering that a great house full of trapped guests is a kind of purgatory specially designed for a man who wishes to be near one person and cannot go near her. Willona Inchbald was everywhere and nowhere. He glimpsed her carrying Mrs. Delacourt's chocolate across the hall. He heard her low voice reading aloud from behind a half-closed door as he passed. He saw her in the long gallery, walking the deaf old lady up and down for exercise, patient as stone while Mrs. Delacourt berated the portraits. The weather, the age, and the general falling off of the world. Willona bore it all with an even sweetness that the Duke, who had watched her flay a baronet without mercy, now understood for what it was, not sweetness at all, but discipline. The iron self-command of a woman who has learned that her bread depends upon never once letting her true face show to the person who pays for it. He found that he wanted, with an intensity that frightened him, to be the person to whom she could show it. He got his chance in the early afternoon, and he got it, as he got most things, by paying for it, though not in the coin he was used to. The gentleman had settled to billiards and the ladies to gossip, and Miss Cordelia Ashe to the pianoforte, where she played the same 3 airs she had learned as a girl with great correctness and no soul whatever, and the Duke, unable to bear another moment of it, went in search of quiet and found instead an open door. It was a small, cold, disused morning room at the end of the east wing, and Willona was in it, standing at the streaming window with her arms wrapped about herself and her forehead very nearly against the glass, watching the rain drown the garden. She had thought herself unobserved. He knew the look by now. The whole of her had loosened, the mask set down, and what stood at the window was simply a tired young woman, a very long way from anywhere she might call home. He should have gone. He knew he should have gone. Instead, he said quietly, "It is the loneliest sound in the world, I have always thought. Rain on a great house. It makes the rooms feel emptier than silence does." She did not startle. She turned her head against the glass and looked at him without surprise, as though she had known all along he would come, or as though she were too tired today to pretend she minded that he had. "Yes," she said simply, "it does." He came into the room. He did not sit. There was a formality he could not quite abandon, some last plank of the drawbridge he could not make himself lower. He stood a little apart by the cold grate and looked at her looking at the rain, and for a while neither of them spoke, and the rain filled the room like a third presence. "You do not ask me anything," he said at last. "Everyone asks me things. The mothers ask after my health, which is to say after my life expectancy. The daughters ask my opinion of their bonnets. The gentlemen ask my opinion of their horses and my interest in their sisters. In 15 years I do not believe one person in this house has asked me a question to which they wished to know the true answer. But you do not ask me anything at all, because I know what you would do," said Willona. She turned from the window and faced him fully, and there was no impertinence in her now, only a kind of clear-eyed weariness that was somehow worse. "You would give me the answer you give everyone, the cold one, the one that ends the conversation and keeps the door shut. You have a great many of them, your grace, and they are all very good, and I have no wish to be handed one like a card on a tray. So I do not ask. It is not rudeness. It is only that I would rather have your silence, which is at least honest, than your practiced answers, which are not." The Duke of Selholm stood very still. The rain went on. And then, because she had done again the thing no one else had ever done, refused the door he held open for her, and waited, and asked nothing, and thereby made it possible for him to speak, he heard himself say the thing he had told no living soul in 15 years. "There was a woman," he said, "when I was 21. Before the title, before any of this, my father lived then, and I was merely a younger man with expectations, which is a very different creature from a duke, and I loved her. I loved her the way one can only manage it once, I think, before one learns better. I told her everything. There was nothing of me she did not have. And she took it all, and she was charming and warm, and she looked at me across a ballroom exactly as Miss Ashe looks at me now, and when a marquess with a larger fortune offered for her, she told me, laughing, that she had never for one instant mistaken me for a man worth loving, only for a title worth having, and a poor one at that, until a better came along. Willona did not gasp or murmur or arrange her face into sympathy. She simply listened, entirely still, her eyes on his, and let the words fall into the quiet of the room without cushioning them, and that unflinching attention was the kindest thing anyone had done for him in his adult life. "So I built a fortress," he said, more roughly than he meant to. "You have seen it. The whole world has seen it. Cold and remote and untouchable, the frost of Selholm they call me, and they are not wrong, and I made very sure they would not be. It is safer. A man who wants nothing cannot be robbed. A man who feels nothing cannot be made a fool of twice." He looked at her, and something in his chest was open that he did not know how to close again, and then a companion in a mended gown told a room full of my guests that she pitied whoever married me. And I found that I had been robbed after all, without ever having lowered the drawbridge, and I do not know how it was done, and I am too old and too proud and too badly frightened to know what to do about it. The silence after that was very long. "You are not frightened of me," Willona said at last, and her voice was not quite steady. "You cannot be. There is nothing in the world less frightening than a poor woman with no dowry and a sharp tongue. I am the safest person you will ever meet, Your Grace. I want nothing from you, because I have long since learned to want nothing from anyone. It is the only fortress a woman in my position is permitted to build, and I built mine as carefully as you built yours, and for exactly the same reason." Her chin lifted. The old spark came back into the sherry eyes, but wet now and unguarded. "So we are two fortresses, sir, looking at one another across a wet garden, each of us quite certain the other is impregnable. It is a very foolish situation. I cannot think how we came to be in it." "Nor I," said the Duke. He crossed the room then. He had not meant to. His feet carried him before his caution could argue. He came and stood close before her, close enough to see the rain-grey light caught in the fine escaping strands of her brown hair, close enough that he had only to lift his hand, and he did lift it, slowly. And with the back of one finger he brushed a single fallen strand from her cheek, and she went absolutely still under the touch, and did not step away. It was the smallest thing. A duke had touched a companion's cheek in an empty room for the space of a breath, and the world had not ended. But the Duke of Selholm felt the whole careful architecture of 15 years shift and settle onto a new foundation in that single instant, and he knew with a certainty that was equal parts terror and joy that there was no going back to the man he had been at the beginning of the week. "Willona," he said. He had never used her name. It sounded in his own mouth like a word in a language he was only now learning to speak. "Don't," she whispered, but she did not move. "Please. Don't be kind to me here, where there is no one to see and no cost to you. Be kind to me in the world, sir, in the daylight, where it would cost you everything, or do not be kind to me at all. I can bear to be nothing to you. I have a great deal of practice at being nothing to people. But I cannot bear to be your secret, your stolen hour, the poor companion you were tender to on a wet afternoon and could not acknowledge by Tuesday. That would break something in me that has stayed whole through a great deal worse, and I will not let you do it. Not even you. So take your hand from my face, Your Grace, and go back to your billiards and your heiresses, and let us both pretend this rain never fell." For a long moment the Duke did not move. His hand hovered at her cheek. Her eyes held his. The whole of his hard-won caution and the whole of his newborn, terrified longing stood at war across the space of a single breath. Then, from the corridor, came the unmistakable brazen bellow of Mrs. Delacourt demanding to know where her wretched companion had got to, and whether the girl expected to be paid for standing about idle, and the moment shattered like the fine thing it was. Willona stepped back. The mask came down. She dropped him a curtsy, correct, cold, a servant's curtsy, and said, in the flat, pleasant voice, "I must go to Mrs. Delacourt, Your Grace. Thank you for directing me to the morning room. I had quite lost my way in the house." And she was gone. Out into the corridor and the demanding old voice and the long grey afternoon, and the Duke of Selholm was left alone in a cold room with the rain and the memory of one strand of brown hair beneath his fingertip, and the terrible new knowledge that she was right, that his kindness, offered only in the dark, was not kindness at all but cowardice wearing its coat, and that if he wanted her, truly wanted her, he would have to want her in the daylight, in the world, before the whole sneering face of society, at a cost that 15 years ago would have seemed to him simply impossible. He stood at the streaming window a long time after she had gone. He was still standing there when his aunt found him, and Lady Ancroft, who missed nothing, looked at his face, and at the 2 chairs no one had used, and the general air of a battlefield lately quit, and for once said nothing clever at all. She only came and stood beside him at the glass, and watched the rain drown her nephew's beautiful cold gardens, and after a while she said, gently, in a voice he had not heard from her since he was a grieving young man of 21, "She is worth 10 of the ashy girl, Kelva. She is worth 10 of anyone I have ever brought into this house. But she is proud and she is poor, and those 2 together will make her refuse you sooner than let you shame yourself for her. So if you mean to have her, my dear, you had best be prepared to shame yourself thoroughly and in public, and soon. Half measures will lose her. They lose everything worth keeping." She patted his sleeve. "I have never known you to do anything by halves except love. Perhaps it is time you mended that." And she left him at the window, and the rain went on falling, and the Duke of Selholm began, very slowly and against the entire grain of his careful life, to think. The rain had stopped by evening, but the damage it had done to the Duke of Selholm's composure showed no sign of drying with it. He came down to the drawing-room that night resolved to be cold and grand and unreadable, and lasted precisely as long as it took him to see that Willona Inchbald was not there. The company was assembled as usual after dinner, the mothers ranged along the walls like a jury, the daughters at their embroidery and their whispered campaigns, the gentlemen drifting between the card tables and the decanters. Miss Cordelia Ashe sat at the pianoforte, working through her 3 correct airs with her 3 correct expressions, and Mrs. Delacourt held court in the best chair by the fire, deaf and magnificent, rapping the arm of it with her fan and demanding of the room at large why no one had thought to bank the coals higher. But the slight figure in the made-over gown, who should have been at the alderman's elbow, fetching and reading and enduring, was nowhere in the candlelit room, and the Duke found that its brilliant assembly had become, in her absence, merely a quantity of noise. He bore it for half an hour. Then he crossed to Mrs. Delacourt's chair, bent to her ear trumpet, and asked, with a courtesy that cost him some effort, after the health of her companion. "Sent her to bed," bellowed Mrs. Delacourt, in the unanswerable volume of the very deaf, so that half the room heard it and pretended not to. Girl looked piqued, white as a sheet all through dinner and no more used than a wet candle. "I told her, go up, I shan't want you again tonight. I can be disagreeable to these people without any help from you." The old lady fixed the Duke with a sudden shrewd little eye. "Why? What's it to you where my companion is, your grace? A great man like you, with all these fine young women laid out for your inspection like fish on a slab. You want to be minding your own courting, and leave my girl to her rest." "Quite so," said the Duke, and straightened, and was aware that his ears had grown warm, which had not happened to him since he was 15. He knew where she would be. He did not examine how he knew. He simply knew. The way he had come this week to know a great many things about her without being told, and he made his excuses within the quarter hour. A duke may leave his own drawing-room whenever he pleases, and the pleasure of it had never seemed so keen, and took a single candle and went. Not up the great stair toward the servants' floor where good sense would have sent him, but along the east wing, toward the library. She was there. Of course she was there. She sat curled in the great chair by the fire, his chair, which had somehow, in the space of 3 days, become entirely and unarguably hers, with a shawl about her shoulders and a book unopened on her knee, and she was not reading. She was looking into the flames, her chin propped on her hand. And her face in the firelight was the tired, unguarded one, the one she showed no one, and he stood a moment in the doorway with his candle, and simply looked at her looking at the fire, and thought that he could stand there looking at her for the rest of his natural life and count it well spent. "You will ruin your eyes sitting in the dark," he said at last gently, so as not to startle her. She did not startle. She had grown used to him now. That was the thing that undid him most of all, that she had ceased to brace herself when he came near. "I am not reading, Your Grace," she said, without turning her head. "I am hiding. There is a difference, and the dark suits it better. If I light a candle, someone will see it under the door and come to see who is being idle, and then I shall have to be a companion again, and I find tonight I have not got the strength for it. You have caught me shirking. You may report me to Mrs. Delacourt if you like. She will dock my quarter's wages and enjoy it enormously, and we shall both feel much improved." He came in and set his candle on the mantel and did not sit, not yet. There was a formality between them still, even now, that he could not quite put down, and stood the fire looking down at her. "You were unwell at dinner," he said. "Mrs. Delacourt says you were white through the whole of it. Are you ill?" "No." A small tired smile. "Only found out. It is a different complaint, and there is no physic for it. You made rather a spectacle of us in the library yesterday, Your Grace, you and I and the Greek, and Miss Ashy standing in the doorway with her mouth open, and it has got about the house, as such things always get about a house, and today I have been looked at, all day. Every mother in the place has weighed me up and found me exactly as dangerous as she feared, and every daughter has decided I am a scheming nobody who has got above herself, and Miss Ashy has been sweetly, poisonously civil to me in the way that only a young woman of very good family knows how to be, which is worse than any insult, because there is nothing in it one can take hold of." She looked up at him at last, and there was no reproach in it, only a weary honesty. "I do not tell you this to make you feel the guilt of it, sir. You did nothing but be kind, and a duke may be kind to whom he pleases. It is one of the great many freedoms that comes with being a duke. I tell you only so that you will understand why I have hidden myself in your library in the dark. It has been a long day of being looked at, and I wanted 1 hour of not being anything to anybody. And now you have found me, and I am afraid I am not sorry, which is the most foolish thing of all." The Duke sat down. He did it slowly, in the chair on the far side of the hearth, the chair that had become his by the same silent treaty that had made the other hers, and he found that his heart was beating rather hard for a man merely sitting down in his own library. "I have been looked at my whole life," he said. "You will forgive me if I do not offer you sympathy for it as though it were a novel affliction, but I will tell you a thing I have learned, which is that there are 2 ways to be looked at, and they are as different as day from night. There is being looked at by people who want something from you. That is the way I have been looked at these 15 years, and it is a cold and tiresome thing, and it teaches you to build walls. And there is being looked at by one person who wants nothing from you at all, and only likes to look. I did not know, until this week, that the second kind existed. I find it is worth a very great deal of the first kind, perhaps all of it." Willona was very still. The fire ticked. "That is dangerously close to a pretty speech, Your Grace," she said, but her voice was not quite steady. "I did not think you had any in you. I begin to fear I have misjudged you." "You have not misjudged me in the smallest particular," said the Duke. "That is precisely the difficulty. You saw straight to the bottom of me across a crowded room the first hour we met, and pronounced sentence, and you were entirely right, and I have been unable to forgive you for it or to stop thinking of you since." He looked into the fire, because it was easier than looking at her. "I came to this house a week ago, meaning to choose a wife the way I choose a horse, for her paces and her breeding, and her likelihood of giving no trouble. My aunt filled the place with suitable young women, and I meant to select one of them and have the business done. And then a companion in a mended gown told a room full of my guests that she pitied whoever married me, and every suitable young woman in the house turned to dust in the same instant, and I have not been able to see a single one of them since. There is only you. It is extremely inconvenient. I had a plan, and you have wrecked it, and I find I do not want it back. Kelver." She said his name softly, and it was the first time she had used it, and the sound of it in her low voice went through him like the old Greek had, like the first warmth after cold. Then she seemed to hear herself and coloured and looked quickly back at the fire. "Forgive me, Your Grace, I forget myself. It is that the dark and the fire and the long day I should go up." "Do not," said the Duke, more quickly than he meant to. "Stay. Read to me. You read the Greek aloud yesterday when you thought I was not listening. and I have thought of little else since. I have a whole library and no one has read aloud in it in 15 years. Read to me, Willona, and let us both be nothing to anybody for 1 hour, and I will not tell Mrs. Delacourt you were idle. And so she did. She opened the book. It was the Herodotus, of course it was. They had neither of them the least intention of reading anything else. And she read to him by firelight in her low, clear voice, the old rolling Greek that her father had wasted on her, because he could not bear to see it go unused, and the Duke of Selholme sat in the warm dark with his eyes half closed and listened, and thought that he had never in his life heard anything so beautiful, and knew that it was not the Greek. She read for the better part of an hour. Now and again she would stop to render a line into English for him, though you have no need of it, your grace. You had a costly education, and I had only my father, but I liked the sound of the two tongues together, and her plain, quick renderings were better than any he had ever paid a tutor for, warm and dry and alive. Once she read a passage that made her laugh, and she looked up to share it with him, forgetting for a moment who they each were, and their eyes met over the top of the book, and the laughter died between them into something else, something that neither of them had any business feeling in a dark library at midnight, and for one long suspended moment neither looked away. Then, from very far off in the great drawing-room at the other end of the house, the pianoforte stopped, and there was a scattering of applause, and the ordinary noise of a party breaking up for the night drifted faintly down the corridors, and the spell loosened its hold. Willona closed the book. "They are going up," she said. "I must go before I am missed, or there will be more looking tomorrow than even I can bear." She rose and gathered her shawl, and the companion's careful composure came back over her like water closing over a stone. But slower this time the Duke saw, and less completely, as though the mask no longer quite fit her as it had at the start of the week. "Thank you, your grace, for the hour, for the not being anything. It was a great kindness, and I shall keep it, whatever comes." She hesitated at the door, the candlelight gilding the loose strands of her hair, and looked back at him where he sat by the dying fire. "You are not at all the man they say you are. I thought you would be, that first night. I thought you would be cold all the way through, like the frost they call you. But you are not. There is a whole warm house behind that frozen wall of yours, Kelver, with the shutters nailed up and the fires unlit. And someone ought to have opened it years ago." A small sad smile. "It is a great pity it will not be me. Good night, your grace." And she was gone, before he could answer, before he could tell her that she had already done it, that the shutters were down and the fires lit, and the whole warm, ruined house of him thrown open to the weather for the first time in 15 years, and there was no closing it again, and that he did not want to. He sat alone in the library long after her candle had faded down the corridor, the Greek open on the arm of the chair where she had left it, and looked into the last red coals, and thought. He thought of the vicious girl 15 years gone, and found, testing the old wound as a man tests a tooth, that it had at last stopped aching, that somewhere in this strange week it had healed over entirely, and he had not even noticed the moment of it. He thought of Cordelia Ashe and her 8,000 a year and her 3 correct heirs, and could not for the life of him remember what her face looked like. And he thought of Willona Inchbold reading Greek by firelight, and laughing up at him over the top of a book, and telling him with tears she would not let fall that someone ought to have opened the warm house years ago, and it was a great pity it would not be her. "It will be you," he told the dark. "It will be no one else ever as long as I live. I do not yet know how, for you are proud and poor, and I am cold and clumsy, and I have forgotten every soft word I ever knew. But it will be you, Willona, or it will be no one, and I would rather it were you and the whole world against us than any comfortable safe nothing the world could hand me." He banked the fire himself, which no duke had done in living memory, and took up his candle, and closed the library on the ghost of her voice, and went up the great stair past the 8 board-painted dukes who had all married exactly as they ought. And he thought, looking up at them in the wavering light, that not one of them had ever been read the Greek by firelight by a woman who wanted nothing from him at all, and that he pitied them, every cold and comfortable one, far more than he had ever, in his careless cruelty, pitied any man who might marry Willona Inchbold. He slept that night better than he had slept in 15 years, And when he woke on the fourth morning, it was with a resolve in him, still vague in its particulars but firm and warm at its centre, that he would find some way, before the week was out, to open the warm house to her, and to let her see, in the daylight and before the world, that she had been its mistress from the first hour she stepped across his threshold and refused to be afraid of him. The rain cleared by the fourth morning, and with it, the Duke of Selholme resolved, would clear his own long habit of cowardice, though the resolving of a thing at dawn and the doing of it at dinner are two very different matters, as he was shortly to learn. He came down determined. He had lain awake half the night turning his aunt's words over and Willona's, and had risen with the intention, still vague in its particulars but firm in its heart, of showing the world in some plain daylight fashion that he honoured Miss Willona Inchbald, of dismantling, brick by public brick, the fortress he had spent 15 years raising. He did not yet know how. He only knew he must, and that he must do it soon, before she and Mrs. Delacourt departed at the week's end and took her out of his reach forever. But a man cannot dismantle in a morning what he has spent half a lifetime building, and the day conspired against him. Gentlemen wanted him for the coverts, his steward wanted him for the accounts, his aunt, mischievously, sat Miss Cordelia Ashley at his right hand through a long nuncheon and left him no honourable escape. And Willona, when he passed her in the hall, gave him the flat, pleasant servant's smile and the correct curtsy and moved on with Mrs. Delacourt's shawls, as though the wet afternoon and the strand of hair and the whole confession of his guarded heart had never happened at all. She had shut the door. She had told him she would, and she had, and he found the shut door unbearable. It was at dinner that the matter came at last to a head, though not in any manner he had planned. Lady Anne Croft, growing bored of watching her nephew fail to court a penniless companion, had contrived a diversion for the evening. After the cloth was drawn, the company would divide into sides and hold a friendly debate, a parlour sport much in fashion that season, in which some frivolous proposition was argued with mock solemnity for the general amusement. The proposition Lady Anne Croft set, with a glint in her eye that the Duke distrusted on sight, was this: that a lady's understanding is a positive impediment to her happiness in marriage, and the less she has of it the better she is served. It was, of course, aimed like an arrow. The Duke knew it, and knew his aunt knew it, and knew, with a sinking certainty, the exact quarter at which the arrow was pointed. For at the foot of the table, where the paid companions sat in a made-over gown between Mrs. Delacourt and the wall, Willona Inchbald had gone very still, her eyes on her plate, and the Duke understood that his aunt, for all her kindness, had just placed the woman he loved squarely in the centre of the field with every gun in the county trained upon her. A young man named Fenwick, cousin to the Ashes and rich in nothing but the confidence of the well-connected fool, took up the proposition with relish. It stands to reason, he declared, warming to the sound of his own voice. A clever wife is a household plague. She argues, she corrects, she has opinions upon matters that are no concern of hers, politics and farming, and heaven knows what. A man comes home wanting peace and finds a debating society at his own fireside. Give me a pretty face and an empty head and a sweet temper, and I'll be the happiest man in England. A woman's cleverness is like a loaded pistol, sir, charming enough on the wall, but you would not wish it in the hands of your wife. There was laughter, easy and cruel, and Miss Cordelia Ashley laughed with the rest, and one or two of the mothers turned their heads, quite openly, toward the foot of the table, to see how the clever companion enjoyed hearing her own worth debated for the table's sport. Willona said nothing. She kept her eyes on her plate. She was, the Duke saw, doing the hardest thing she knew how to do, which was to hold her tongue, because a companion who bested a room full of her betters in open debate would be admired for an evening and ruined for a lifetime, dismissed within the month as impertinent, unplaceable, above her station, and turned out without a character to starve. She knew it. She sat and swallowed it, and the effort of her silence was written plain in the white line of her knuckles about her fork, and the Duke of Selholme, watching, felt something in him that had been cold for 15 years catch fire and roar. "Mr. Fenwick," said the Duke. The table quieted at once, as it always did when he spoke. Fenwick turned, gratified to have drawn the great man's notice. "You liken a woman's understanding to a loaded pistol," the Duke said. His voice was level, unhurried, and colder than the grave. "It is an apt figure, and I will build upon it, since you seem fond of it. A loaded pistol is a very dangerous thing to a man who does not know how to hold one. A fool with a pistol is a menace to himself and everyone near him. Pistol in the hand of a man of sense is protection and provision, and the surest friend he has in a hard hour. The fault, sir, was never in the pistol. It was always and only in the fool. He let that settle. You tell us you would be happiest with a pretty face and an empty head. I do not doubt it in the least. A man is best matched to his own understanding, and I would not for the world wish upon you a wife who could see to the bottom of you, for you would not survive the acquaintance a fortnight. But you must allow that other men are built to a larger scale. Some of us, a few of us, should find an empty head across the table not a comfort but a life sentence, a slow starvation of 40 years, and would count a clever wife not a plague, but the single mercy that made the long business of living worth the trouble. You may keep your pretty fool, sir, and welcome. I would not trade 1 hour of true conversation for a lifetime of them. The silence was absolute. No one at that table had ever heard the Frost of Selholm say so many words together, and certainly not warm ones, and certainly not in defense of a proposition that everyone present understood. Now, to be a defense of the silent young woman at the foot of the table. And since we are speaking of understanding, the Duke went on, more quietly, and every head strained to hear him, I will confess to the table that I have this week enjoyed exactly one conversation in this house that I would call by that name. It was not with a lady of fortune, nor of fashion, nor of family. It with a person whom several of you have spent this evening amusing yourselves by insulting, in the belief that she was too dependent upon your goodwill to answer you. She was not too dependent. She was too well bred. There is a difference, and it is one that I perceive not everyone at this table has been fortunate enough to be taught. His dark eyes moved without haste over the flushed and silenced faces of the mothers and the daughters and the fool Fenwick, and came to rest, at last, on Willona. I have found her the wisest companion I have known in 15 years. I say so plainly before you all, and I will thank the person who repeats it out of doors to repeat it exactly, and add that the Duke of Selholm was entirely in earnest. At the foot of the table, Willona Inchbald had lifted her head at last. She was staring at him, white-stricken, the moss gone, her sherry eyes enormous, and in them the Duke read not the triumph he had thought to give her, but something closer to horror, and understood too late that he had done the very thing she had begged him not to do. He had been kind to her in the daylight, before the world, at a cost to himself, but he had also in the same breath made her the object of every hostile eye in 3 counties, marked her out as the companion the Duke had championed, and every woman at that table who had come to the party hoping for him now looked at her with a hatred that would follow her to the ends of the earth. She rose. Her chair scraped in the terrible quiet. Mrs. Delacourt is tired, she said, though Mrs. Delacourt, deaf to the whole exchange, was placidly finishing her syllabub. I must take her up. Pray excuse us. And she curtsied to the table, not to him, and got the old woman to her feet, and went out of the dining room with her head high and her back straight and her whole future, the Duke saw with a plunging heart, in ruins about her feet, and it was he who had ruined it. He would have gone after her that instant. His aunt's hand closed hard about his wrist under the table's edge and held him in his chair. Not now, Lady Ancroft breathed, smiling brilliantly at the shattered company, raising her voice to rescue the evening. Now you will sit and be a duke and let me pour oil on these waters, or you will make it 10 times worse for her. Later. You may ruin yourself for her all you like later, when there are fewer witnesses to make her pay for it. Sit, Kelver. Sit and trust me, for once in your stubborn life he sat. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, and he did it badly, staring at the door through which she had gone while his aunt worked the table like the general she was, laughing, deflecting, turning Fenwick's humiliation into a joke against Fenwick, restoring by main force the comfortable surface of things. But the surface was all it was. Everyone in that room now knew. The Duke of Selholm had lost his cold heart to a penniless companion, and had said as much before witnesses, and the news would be in every drawing-room in the county by Sunday and in London by the following week. He did not care. He found, sitting in his ruined dinner, that he did not care one particle for the news or the county or the sneering faces of London. He cared only that he had hurt her, that in trying clumsily to honor her, he had exposed her to a cruelty she had spent her whole hard life learning to avoid, and that the last look she had turned on him had been not love but fear. He found her nowhere that night. She did not come down again. He walked the cold corridors until the candles guttered, past the shut door of Mrs. Delacourt's chamber behind which he could hear nothing, and at last, defeated, he went up to his own room and did not sleep at all, and understood, somewhere in the small black hours, the half-measures had indeed lost him everything worth keeping, and that if he wanted to win it back it would take not a speech at a dinner table, but something far larger, far more final, far more costly to his pride than anything he had yet dared. By the grey of the next morning he knew what it must be. It astonished him that he had not seen it from the first. It would scandalize the county, appall his relations, and set the whole of society by the ears, and it was, he understood at last, the only honest thing, the only thing that would cost him enough to prove itself true, the only offer a proud poor woman could accept without being shamed by it. He would not court her in secret. He would not honor her in a speech and abandon her to the consequences. He would marry her openly, quickly, before the county could gather itself to prevent it, before her own proud terror could talk her out of it, before he could lose his nerve. He would go to her not as a duke conferring a favor, but as a man asking for his life. And he would do it, he resolved, standing at his window in the cold clean light with his heart hammering like a boy's. Before the week was out, before Friday, she was leaving. That was the first thing the Duke of Selholm learned on the 5th morning, and he learned it not from her, but from a footman, who mentioned in the course of laying out the breakfast things that Mrs. Delacourt had called for her carriage to be brought round after noon, a full 2 days before the party was to end, and that the old lady's companion had been up since dawn packing the trunks. The Duke set down his coffee untasted and went to find her. He found her, in the end, not in the library nor the garden nor any of the places that had become theirs, but in the cold echoing hall of the east wing, kneeling beside a strapped trunk, checking its buckles with the swift, competent hands of a woman who has packed to leave a great many houses, and expects to pack to leave a great many more. She heard his step and did not rise and did not turn and went on with the buckles. "You are going," he said. "Mrs. Delacourt finds the party fatiguing," said Willona to the trunk. Her voice was perfectly even, the servant's voice, the flat, pleasant tone that gave nothing away. "She wishes to be home. It is my place to see her comfortable, and so we go. I have thanked Lady Ancroft for her hospitality. There is nothing left to do but the trunks, and they are nearly done, and then we shall be out of your Grace's way, and you may have your house and your heiresses to yourself again. Willona, look at me." "No," she said, and now the Venice cracked, one hairline fissure, and through it he heard the whole of what she was holding back. "No, I will not look at you, because if I look at you I shall say something I cannot afford to say, and I have spent one entire night learning that I cannot afford you, your Grace, in any coin I possess. Do you know what you did to me last night? Do you have the smallest conception of it?" She rose at last and faced him, and her eyes were dry and burning. "You stood up before 30 of the first people in the county, and you told them the Duke of Selholm prefers the company of a paid companion to any lady of fortune in his house. It was the kindest, the most reckless, the most thoughtless thing anyone has ever done to me, and by this hour there is not a great house within 50 miles that would take me on. A companion the Duke made love to his own dinner table. I am ruined, sir. Not in the common way. I have my virtue and my good name entire, and much good they will do me, but ruined all the same, unplaceable byword. A woman no careful mistress will let past her door for fear of what her husband might catch. You did that. You, with your warm speech and your loaded pistols. You meant it as a gift, and it was a knife, and I have been bleeding from it since 10 o'clock last night, and you did not even know. The Duke stood in the cold hall and took it, every word of it, because every word was just. "I know now," he said. "I knew it the moment you rose from the table. Willona, I have come to—" "Don't." She held up a hand. "Whatever it is, don't. I know what a man like you does when he has wronged a woman like me. You will offer to settle something upon me. A sum, a cottage, a small annuity to ease your conscience. A place found for me through your influence where the story has not yet reached. It is generous and it is kindly meant, and I would rather starve in a ditch than take 1 shilling of it. Because it would make me exactly the thing every woman at that table already believes me to be. So spare us both, your grace. Keep your money. Let me keep the one thing you have not yet managed to take from me, which is the right to leave this house owing you nothing. And there it was, the moment he had turned over all night, the offer he had rehearsed in the dark. And he made it now, and he made it badly. Because he was a proud man unpracticed in the humbling of himself, and he reached, in his terror, for the shape of a transaction, because a transaction was the only shape he knew. I do not offer you money, the Duke said. I offer you my name, marry me, Willona. It is the only remedy that answers. You say you are ruined, then let me unruin you. There is no house in England that will slight the Duchess of Selholm. You say you are unplaceable, then I will place you above them all, so high that not one of those women who sneered at you last night will dare to lift her eyes to yours. It is the sensible course. It repairs what I have broken. It settles your future past any accident of fortune, and it— Stop. Her face had gone white to the lips. Stop. Oh, you fool. You proud, blind, well-meaning fool. And to his horror her eyes filled at last, the tears she had not shed through all the rest of it spilling now over the ruin of his careful offer. You have just done it again. You cannot help yourself. Marry you as a remedy, as the sensible course. To unruin me and settle my future and repair what you broke, as a man might repair a fence he had driven his carriage through. Do you hear yourself, your grace? You have offered me your name the way you would offer a tenant compensation for a burned barn. It is the grandest, coldest charity I have ever been offered in a life full of charity, and it is worse, it is 1,000 times worse, than the annuity, because I could have refused the annuity with my heart whole. The Duke stood stunned. I do not, he began, and could not find the end of it. That is not. You never once said that you loved me. Willona's voice broke fully now, and she did not try to mend it. In all of it, last night, this morning, all your fine, warm words about conversation, understanding, and clever wives, you spoke of my usefulness, your grace. My wit, my sense, my company, all the things I am good for, all the ways I would serve you well across a table for 40 years. You want me the way you want a well-run estate or a good library, because I would improve your comfort and never bore you, and that is not nothing. I know it is not nothing. It is a great deal more than most women in my position are ever offered, and God forgive me, part of me wants to seize it with both hands and never mind the rest. But I have been useful all my life, sir. I have been useful to people who did not love me since I was 15 years old. I swore, kneeling by my father's grave with nothing in the world but my wits and his Greek, that if I ever married it would be to a man who wanted me, not my usefulness, not my conversation, not my sense, me. This troublesome, penniless, sharp-tongued woman that nobody has ever once wanted for her own sake, and you cannot say it. You stand there offering me a duchess coronet, and you cannot say 3 plain words, because you are frightened of your own heart that you have walled it up where even you cannot reach it. Well, I will not marry a wall, your grace. I would rather have my ditch. The silence rang. Everything in the Duke of Selholm rose up to answer her. The words were there, they had been there for days. I love you. I have loved you since you turned from the pianoforte and refused to be afraid of me. I do not want a duchess. I want you, only you, this troublesome woman. For her own sake and no other. The words were all there, crowded in his chest, and 15 years of iron habit closed his throat against them like a fist. He had built the fortress too well. He had spent his whole adult life making certain that no one could ever again reach into him and take the one thing that could break him, and now the one person he would have given it to gladly stood before him with her hand out, and he could not, in the crisis, make the drawbridge fall. He said nothing. He stood, rigid and stricken and mute, for one heartbeat too long. And Willona Inchbald watched the silence stretch, and watched the words not come, and something in her face closed like a book. She had staked everything on that single moment, had laid down her pride and her armor and her hard, safe emptiness, and asked him plainly for the truth, and the truth had not come, and she was too proud and too badly hurt to ask again. Yes, she said very quietly, that is what I thought. Goodbye, your grace. She bent and took up the smaller of the 2 trunks and carried it herself, because there was no footman to carry it and she had never in her life waited for someone else to carry her burdens. And she walked away from him down the long cold hall of the East Wing, her back straight and her steps steady, and the Duke of Selholm stood rooted where she had left him and watched her go, the words still locked and useless in his chest, and did not call out, and did not follow, and let her go. He heard the carriage on the gravel an hour later. He was at the library window, their window, the room where he had first found her curled in his chair with the Greek on the first true morning of his life. And he watched the old travelling coach come round from the stables and stand steaming in the noon light, and watched Mrs. Delacourt handed up into it by a footman, and watched, last of all, a slight figure in a made-over gown climb in behind her without one backward glance at the great house or the man he knew was watching from its windows. The door was shut. The coachman spoke to the horses, and the carriage carried Willona Inchbald down the long avenue of limes and out through the great gates of Selholme and away, growing smaller and smaller, until the dusk closed over it and she was gone. The Duke stood at the window for a very long time after there was nothing left to see. His aunt found him there as the light was failing. She did not ask what had happened. She had seen the carriage go, and she had seen his face, and Lady Ancroft had buried a husband and 2 brothers and understood the look of a man standing among the wreckage of his own making. She came and stood beside him at the glass as she had stood in the rain 2 days before, and for a while she said nothing at all. I offered for her, the Duke said at last, and his voice was not steady. I asked her to marry me, and she refused me. Did she? Lady Ancroft did not sound surprised. And did you tell her when you asked that you loved her? The long silence was answer enough. Ah, Kelva, his aunt closed her eyes. You great fool. You dear, ruined, frozen fool. You offered her everything in the world except the one thing she wanted, which was free and cost you nothing but the courage to say it, and you would not. She opened her eyes and looked at him, and there was no mockery in her now, only a deep and weary love. 15 years you have kept that gate shut so no one could rob you, and now the one woman who would never in 1,000 years have robbed you has ridden away because you could not open it even for her. Do you know what you have done? You have proved that vicious girl right after all this time. You have made yourself at last exactly the man she said you were, a title with no man inside it worth the loving. Except that it was never true, and you are letting a lie 15 years old rob you of the only true thing you ever found. The Duke of Selholme turned from the window. Something had changed in his face, some last plank, some final beam of the fortress, giving way at last under a weight it could no longer bear. Then I must unprove it, he said. Aunt, how far can they travel before dark? Lady Ancroft looked at her nephew, and slowly, the general's gleam came back into her old shrewd eyes. Augusta Delacourt's coachman is 70 and her horses are older, she said. And it is a full day's journey to her house, and there is only the one decent inn upon the road, at Marbury, where she has stopped every year of her life because she trusts no other bed. They will not reach it much before nightfall. She was already turning for the bell. You have a fast horse in that stable, Kelva, and perhaps 4 hours of daylight. I suggest you do not waste them standing at windows. And Kelva, she caught his arm as he strode past her, and her voice cracked, just once on the pride in it, when you find her, the 3 words. Say them first, before anything else, before you say one word about coronets or remedies or scents. Say them the moment you see her face, do you understand me? Everything depends on it. Everything. Yes, said the Duke of Selholme already at the door. Yes, I understand you. And for the first time in 15 years he did. He rode as he had not ridden since he was a reckless boy, before the title and the fortress and the long cold years, bareheaded, his coat flung on and unbuttoned. The great black hunter stretched flat beneath him, and the wind tearing the breath from his mouth, down the avenue of limes and out through the gates and onto the Marbury road with the low sun red at his back, and his own heart hammering out the 3 words he had waited 15 years too long to say. The Duke of Selholme had spent his adult life in careful motion, weighing every step, and he found now, with the hedgerows blurring past and the light going gold and the miles falling away under the hunter's driving stride, that recklessness felt not like danger but like coming home. He should have done this on the first morning. He should have done it in the library, over the Greek. He had wasted a whole precious week being a duke when he might have been a man, and if he had cost himself the only thing he had ever truly wanted, then he had earned the loss, and he would carry it, but not by God, without first riding the horse into the ground to try to mend it. The light was nearly gone when he came at last to Marbury, and the lamps of the inn were being lit, warm squares of yellow in the blue dusk, and there in the inn-yard stood Augusta Delacourt's ancient travelling coach, the horses being led away steaming to the stable, the trunks not yet brought down. He was in time. He flung himself from the saddle before the hunter had fully stopped, tossed the reins to a gaping ostler, and strode into the low warm bustle of the inn with his heart in his throat. He found her in the private parlour. She was standing at the small window with her back to the door, looking out at the darkening yard, and Mrs. Delacourt was nowhere to be seen, gone up already to her trusted bed, no doubt, leaving her companion to see to the trunks and the reckoning. Willona had taken off her bonnet. In the firelight her brown hair was coming loose from its pins, the escaping strands he loved, and she stood very straight and very still and very alone, a slight figure at a stranger's window, a long day's journey from any place she belonged. And the sight of her stopped the breath in the Duke's chest and very nearly the words with it. But not quite. Not this time. Willona. She went rigid. She did not turn at once. He saw her shoulders draw in, saw her gather herself, and when she did turn her face was white and composed and braced for battle, the sherry eyes gone hard and bright. "Your Grace," she said, "you have ridden a very long way to be refused a second time. I had thought you too proud. I am sorry for it. My answer has not changed since noon, and I will thank you not to. I love you," said the Duke of Selholm. The words fell into the small firelit room and stopped her utterly. Whatever she had braced herself to hear, it had not been that, and it took her defence from her all at once, the way a single true blow ends a fight that 100 feints could not. She stared at him, her lips parted. And the Duke, seeing that he had, for once in his life, said the right thing first, hurried on before his old cowardice could rise again, the drawbridge down at last, and the whole flood of 15 damned years pouring out of him. "I love you. I have loved you since you turned from the pianoforte in my drawing-room, and refused to be afraid of me, since the first honest word anyone has spoken to me in 15 years came out of your impertinent mouth, and knocked the whole of my careful life to pieces. I love your wit, and your Greek, and your temper, and your pride. I love the face you wear for the world, and the tired one underneath it that you showed me by the wet window, and have never shown me since. I do not want a duchess, Willona. I have wanted a duchess for a fortnight and been offered a dozen and refused them all without knowing why. And the why is you. I want you, this troublesome, penniless, sharp-tongued, wholly maddening woman, for your own sake, and for no other reason under heaven. And if you turn me out of this room, I will love you exactly as much tomorrow, and every day after, and it will change nothing, because I have tried for 15 years not to feel anything, and I find I have entirely lost the trick of it, and I do not want it back." He crossed the room to her. He stopped an arm's length away, close, but not touching, leaving the last small distance for her to keep or close as she chose, because he had learned at last that she must never again be given anything she had not freely reached for. "This morning," he said low, "I offered you my name and called it a remedy, and I deserved every word you flayed me with, because I was a coward, and I reached for the shape of a bargain, because a bargain was the only thing I have let myself feel safe wanting in 15 years. But it was never a bargain. Let me say it now the way I should have said it then." And the Duke of Selholm, before whom 3 counties trembled, went down, slowly, deliberately, on one knee, on the plain boards of a country inn, and looked up at her, and his voice at last was not steady at all. "I am not offering to unruin you. I am asking you to ruin me, thoroughly and forever, past all repair, to take a cold, proud fool who does not deserve you and make him into a man, which no one else on earth has ever managed, and no one else on earth ever will. I have no remedy to offer you and no sense in it whatsoever. I have only this, that I love you, and I will love you when we are both old and you have grown tired of winning every argument, and that if you will have me, there is not a morning left in my life that I would not rather spend cold over the Greek with you than warm and grand and alone with anyone else who has ever lived. Marry me, not because it is sensible, because I cannot imagine the rest of my life without you in it, and I have discovered, this long day, that I would very much rather not try." Willona Inchbald stood over him with the firelight in her loosening hair, and the hard bright armour in her eyes cracked, and broke and dissolved entirely, and the tears came, not the bitter ones of the morning, but different ones altogether. And she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and gave a sound that was half a sob and wholly a laugh. "Get up," she said unsteadily. "Oh, get up, you ridiculous man. You cannot kneel on an inn floor. Someone will come in with the coals and find the Duke of Selholm proposing to a companion, and then we shall both be ruined, and there will be no one left to unruin anybody." But she was reaching for him as she said it, her hands coming out to catch his as he rose, and she did not let go of them once he had. "You said it first," she whispered. "You dreadful, impossible man. You rode 40 miles in the dark to say 3 words you could not say across a hole this morning, and you said them first, before anything, exactly as—" She stopped and looked at him with sudden wet suspicion. "Your aunt told you to say them first, did she not?" "She did," the Duke admitted. "Every word of the strategy is Ottoline's. The feeling, I am glad to tell you, is entirely my own." And Willona laughed properly then, through the tears, and it was the rusty-gate laugh she had drawn out of Mrs. Delacourt, and it was the most beautiful sound the Duke of Selholm had ever heard. "Then yes," she says. "Yes, God help us both, yes. I have been in love with you since you laughed in the library, that terrible rusty laugh, like a man who has forgotten how, and I told myself every hour since that I was a fool, that a woman in my position could not afford it, that you would never in your life be able to say what I needed to hear, and I have never in all my days been so glad to be wrong about anything. Yes, Kelva, I will marry you. I will ruin you thoroughly. It will be my life's chief occupation, and I shall be very good at it." He kissed her then, or she kissed him. Neither of them could ever afterward agree upon which, and both maintained privately that it had been the other. It was not a long kiss, nor a practiced one, for he was 15 years out of the habit, and she had never been in it at all, but it was warm, and it was true, and it undid the last cold knot in the Duke of Selholm's chest and left him, at 36, feeling absurdly and gloriously like a boy of 20, who has just been handed the whole bright world. When they drew apart at last, she kept her forehead against his coat, and his arms about her, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, and the fire ticked, and the good ordinary bustle of the inn went on beyond the door, unknowing. "They will be very cruel about it," Willona said at last into his coat, and though her voice was steady, he heard the old warreness underneath it, the reflex of a woman who has never once been allowed to keep a good thing without paying. "You know that, a duke and a penniless companion. It will be the scandal of the age. The mothers will never forgive you, and they will never ever forgive me. They will say I trapped you, that I schemed, that a clever woman played a lonely man for his title, which is the very thing you feared most in all the world. You are certain, Kelva? Truly certain, because I will hold you to it, and there will be no unsaying it, and I could not bear to watch you come, in a year, to wish you had married your 8,000 a year and been comfortable." The Duke of Selholm took her face in both his hands and made her look at him. "Let them talk," he said. "Let them say every word of it. I have spent 15 years arranging my whole life around the fear of what such people might say, and it made me the loneliest man in England, and I am done with it. I was done with it the moment your carriage went through my gates and took the light with it. As to the scandal, I mean to give them a far larger one than they are expecting, and give it to them so quickly they will have no time to gather themselves and try to prevent it." His dark eyes were alight now, and there was something almost boyish in the recklessness of it. "I have a fast horse, and a special license may be had from the bishop, who owes me a living and 3 favours, and will not dare refuse me. We are but 2 days' ride from Selholm. If we turn the coach about tomorrow, and if you are willing, and only if you are willing, Willona, for I will not rush you 1 hour past your own wish, then I see no earthly reason why the Duchess of Selholm should not be married in her own parish church, before the whole scandalized county, with my aunt weeping in the front pew and every gossip in 3 shires straining at the windows." He smiled, and it was the warmest thing his hard face had ever done. "I told a room full of them a week ago that I pitied the man who married you. I find I am in a great hurry to become that man. Will you have me, my love, and will you have me by Friday?" And Willona Inchbald, penniless companion, clergyman's daughter, the cleverest and least comfortable woman in 3 counties, looked up into the face of the Duke of Selholm and gave him the only answer that a week of sparring and 1 long day of grief had left her any power to give. By Friday, she said, "Yes, let them all come and stare. I have been stared at my whole life for being poor. Let them stare for once, because I am loved. Yes, Kelver, by Friday and gladly, and for the rest of my life." They turned the coach about the next morning, and the county did not have time to prevent it, which was precisely as the Duke of Selholm had intended. There is a particular pleasure, he discovered over the following days, in doing swiftly and openly the very thing the world most wishes to gather itself and forbid. He had spent his life giving society all the time it wanted to approve of him. Now he gave it none at all, and found the sensation intoxicating. Word of the Duke's madness ran ahead of them faster than any horse, that he had ridden through the night to a country inn, that he had gone down on his knee to a companion on a public floor, that he had turned Augusta Delacourt's coach around and was fetching the girl back to Selholm to marry her out of hand, and the county rose to it like a pond to a thrown stone. Ring upon widening ring of scandal and delight and fury, and could do nothing whatsoever to stop him, because a special license waits upon no one's approval, and the bishop, as predicted, did not dare refuse. Mrs. Delacourt took the whole business with the magnificent indifference of the very deaf and the very old. When Willona knelt by her chair at the inn and shouted the news into her ear trumpet, that she was to marry the Duke of Selholm on Friday, and would the old lady give her blessing, and forgive her for leaving her service so abruptly, the ancient terror looked at her companion for a long moment with her sharp little eyes, and then said, "Well, and about time. I have watched that man watch you all week like a starving dog at a butcher's window, and I am 70 years too old to pretend I did not know what it meant. You will make a far better duchess than any of those simpering nothings, and you will lead him a fine dance, and it will be the making of him. Go and marry your Duke, girl. I shall come to the wedding and cry, and it will do my rheumatism a great deal of good," and she rapped Willona's knuckles with her fan, which was from Augusta Delacourt, a caress. Lady Ancroft was waiting on the steps of Selholm when the coach came up the avenue of limes, and she came down them faster than a woman of her years had any business moving, and she had Willona out of the carriage and into her arms before the girl had got both feet on the gravel. "There you are," she said fiercely into Willona's hair. "There you are at last, you clever, proud, difficult creature. I have been trying to marry that nephew of mine to some suitable fool for 15 years. And the moment I stopped trying, he went and found the one woman in England worth having entirely by himself, which is exactly like him. And I have never been so pleased to be made redundant in all my life." She held the girl at arm's length and looked her over with the frank, shrewd love she gave to nothing and no one lightly. "You will call me Ottoline, and you will let me help you dress on Friday, because you have no mother and I have no daughter, and I mean to remedy both at a stroke. And you will go on saying outrageous things to him at dinner until the day one of you dies, because he needs it as other men need air, and there is no one else alive with the courage to do it. Welcome home, my dear, welcome home." And Willona Inchbald, who had not had a home since her father died, nor a mother since before she could remember, put her face in the Dowager Lady Ancroft's shoulder and wept, and was held, and was for the first time in a very long hard life, entirely welcome somewhere. The Duke, watching from the top of the steps, found that his own eyes were not perfectly dry, and did not trouble to hide it, and was aware with a kind of wonder that a week ago he would have died before letting any living soul see him weep, and that the man who had felt so was gone, and that he did not miss him at all. The 3 days between were a whirlwind, and the whole of Selholm was caught up in it. There was the licence, fetched by a groom who half killed a horse to bring it. There was the parish church to be readied, the old vicar torn between scandal and delight. There was the gown, for Willona had nothing fit, and would take no charity, until Lady Ancroft pointed out with great firmness that a gift from one's aunt is not charity but tradition, and bore her off to be fitted in a soft ivory silk that made the girl, when at last she stood before the glass in it, go very quiet and press her hand to her mouth, 'cause she had never in her life anything so beautiful, nor believed she ever would. You look, said the Duke, who had come upon them and been scolded out of the room but had seen, in the one forbidden instant, quite enough. You look like a woman I intend to spend the whole of my life failing to deserve. Good, said Willona, recovering, chin lifting in the old way that undid him every time. See that you keep failing. A man who thinks he deserves his happiness grows careless of it. I mean to keep you grateful, your grace, for 40 years at the least. I have every confidence in you, said the Duke, and meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to pay, and she understood him as she always did, and that understanding, that swift silent knowing, the thing he had wanted his whole life, without ever having a name for it, was worth, he thought, every cold and guarded year that had brought him at last to her. They were married on Friday. The church was full. Of course it was full. The whole county had come, drawn by scandal as much as by any goodwill, the mothers and the daughters and the disappointed heiresses. The fool Fenwick, Miss Cordelia Ashe with her chin very high, all of them come to see the great Duke of Selholm throw himself away on a penniless companion, come half hoping, some of them, that the bride would falter, or the groom repent, or some last-moment mercy of fortune deliver them the satisfaction of a scandal collapsed. They filled the pews in their silks and their pearls, and they whispered behind their gloves, and they watched the door, and Willona Inchbold walked up the aisle of Selholm Church on the arm of no one, because there was no one to give her away, and she had refused, gently, every offer, saying that she had given herself away the moment she said yes at the inn, and would not now pretend it had been anyone's gift to make but her own. She walked alone, in her ivory silk, her brown hair dressed at last by loving hands, with a few soft strands escaping as they always did, her head high and her step steady, and her sherry eyes fixed on the tall, dark figure waiting for her at the altar, and she did not falter, and she did not look once at the whispering pews. And the whispering, by the time she was halfway up the aisle, had died entirely away, for there was nothing in her face for them to feed upon. No fear, no shame, no wavering, no companion's careful mask. There was only a woman walking toward the man she loved with her whole self unguarded in her eyes, and there is no gossip on earth that can stand against the sight of that. And one by one the whispers stopped, and the sneers faltered, and even the cruelest of them fell silent, because they were, whatever else they were, human, and they were watching two people who had found the thing that every soul in that church, in its secret heart, most wanted and most despaired of finding. The Duke of Selholm watched her come, and did not trouble to school his face into anything at all. He let them all see it, the whole county, the mothers, the heiresses, the fool who had likened her wit to a loaded pistol. He let every one of them see the frost of Selholm look at his bride with the 15 years of their breaking open in his eyes, and he found, to his own vast astonishment, that he was not ashamed, that he would never be ashamed again, that a man who is loved has nothing left in all the world to fear. They spoke their vows in clear voices. When the Duke said, "I will," he said it looking at her and not at the vicar, and when it came her turn Willona's voice did not shake, and only he was near enough to see that her hands did. He took them in his own, both of them, there at the altar before the whole staring county, and held them until they steadied, and she looked up at him and smiled, and the old vicar, who had married 3 generations of cold Selholm dukes to their suitable cold brides, pronounced them man and wife, and had to stop and clear his throat before he could finish, because in 50 years in that pulpit he had never once seen a Selholm wedding that looked like this one. Afterward, on the steps of the church in the bright Friday morning, with the bells going overhead and the scandalized county pouring out around them into a day that had refused, after all, to give them a scandal, it was Lady Ancroft who could not resist it, who caught her new niece by both hands at the top of the steps and turned, with wicked deliberate mischief, to the assembled cream of 3 counties, and pitched her clear old voice to carry. "A week ago," said the Dowager Lady Ancroft to the county at large, "at my particular request, and in this dear boy's own drawing-room, I heard the Duke of Selholm pronounce that he pitied the man who married Miss Willona Inchbold." She paused, letting it land, letting every head turn. "I think we may all agree that His Grace has answered his own remark more thoroughly than any of us could have hoped. Kelva, my dear, have you any pity left this morning for the man who married her, and the Duke of Selholm?" standing on the church steps in the sunlight with his wife's hand in his and the bells of Selholme ringing over them both, looked out over the whole gathered, silenced, staring county, the mothers and the heiresses and the fool Fenwick, all the small, cold, cruel, comfortable people among he had spent 15 guarded and lonely years, and he laughed, the rusty laugh, the one she had first drawn out of him over the Greek, only it was not rusty any longer. He said, "Madam, I pity every man in England who did not marry her, and there is not one among them, from the king in his palace to the poorest cottager on my land, whom I would change places with this morning for all the world and everything in it. I said I pitied the man who married Miss Inchbald. I was, as my wife will tell you, as my wife will tell me, at length, and often, and rightly, for the next 40 years, entirely and completely wrong. I am that man, and I am the most fortunate creature drawing breath, and I have the honour to bid you all good day." And he turned from them all, from the whole watching world he had feared so long and needed never to have feared at all, and he looked down at Willona, Duchess of Selholme, his impossible, penniless, sharp-tongued, altogether extraordinary wife, and she looked up at him with the sunlight and the sherry warmth and the whole of her unguarded heart in her eyes, and neither of them spared the county another glance. "Home?" said the Duke of Selholme very low for her alone. "Home," said his Duchess. "And Kelva, there is a copy of Herodotus in the library that I never did finish on the morning you found me. I have thought of it every day since. I should like very much to finish it now by our own fire, with no one to interrupt us, and nowhere either of us has to be." "Then we shall finish it together," said the Duke, "this very afternoon, and every winter after, for the rest of our lives." And he handed her up into the waiting carriage as though she were made of the rarest and most precious stuff in the whole of creation, which he had come to understand she was. The carriage carried them down the avenue of limes and through the great gates of Selholme, the same gates through which she had ridden away from 5 days before and taken the light with her, and this time she was beside him, and the light came too, and stayed. Behind them the bells rang on over the emptying churchyard, and the scandalized county went home to its cold, comfortable dinners to talk of nothing else for a 12-month, and could none of it touch them, not one whisper of it, ever again. And in the library at Selholme that afternoon, the fire was lit, and 2 chairs were drawn up close on either side of the warm hearth this time, not the cold one, and the Duke of Selholme sat with his wife's stockinged feet tucked up under the edge of his own chair, and her low, clear voice reading him the old Greek in the firelight. And now and again she would stop and say something outrageous, and he would laugh the laugh that was no longer rusty at all, and reach across the small warm space between the chairs and take her hand and hold it and not let go. He had built a fortress and lived in it, cold and safe and alone, for 15 years. It had taken a penniless companion with a wicked tongue and eyes like firelit sherry exactly 5 days to pull the whole of it down around his ears and open every shuttered window and let the light and the warmth and the whole loud living world come flooding in at last. He would spend the rest of his life thanking her for it, in every way a man can thank the one who has saved him, and she would spend the rest of hers pretending she had done nothing at all, and winning every argument, and loving him without measure, and never once. To the end of their long and happy days, letting him grow careless of his fortune. The whole county had come to watch a duke throw his life away. They had watched, instead, a cold man find it, and take it home and keep it, and treasure it, warm by the fire, for all the rest of his days.